Hello, and welcome to the FEZ show. This is the first show that we've actually filmed in the evening, so it's currently the 15th of June, but when you will see this, it will be the 16th of June. So we have quite a bit to talk about today, so joining me on the show is William Dodds and Jack Pickering. Evening, boys.
Good evening. Yeah, thank you for doing this at a time where I'm not, where I'm actually awake, fully dressed and sober. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah, it's a bit better than our 9:45, like a roll call. I think that's probably the correct term, Will.
Yeah, so I've actually managed to take kind of 5 minutes out of my revision schedule to do this because I have my exam on Thursday. So thank you for doing it.
What exam are you doing?
So it's my last journalism exam, which is PR and Communications for Journalists. Which, seeing as I actually have worked in a PR agency in the past, I am hoping that I'll be okay in, but you never know.
Oh, mate, I'm sure you'll be fine, and we're all rooting for you here on Thursday. But thank you so much for coming on the show. First thing I want to talk about, which probably doesn't even involve you two quite yet. Obviously, we launched a Twitch channel, okay? And our first Twitch stream will be tomorrow. So come along. You'll be watching this probably about 5 p.m. So hopefully in about 8 p.m. So in a couple of hours' time, get your dinner, settle down, get your evening sorted, head over to the Formula Rezone Twitch channel. There will be a link in this YouTube video. We'll be playing Motorsport Manager, and there is a poll that has gone out and it's just finished. So we'll be making Tesla. Tesla was the team, the car manufacturer everyone had chosen. So we'll be creating Tesla and obviously having a really bad Tesla car to begin with and trying to see how we can do in Formula E, enjoying the Formula E grid. But let's talk Formula E, because the first thing I want to talk about, Jack, is Formula E the hardest sport to restart? Now, why I'm saying this is one reason, really. Formula One, let's take Formula One, for example. They're going to Austria, they're going to Silverstone. They're in, isolated locations where there's a racetrack, where they can easily go racing. Formula E have to go into city circuits, okay? Now, and obviously we might be going to Berlin, but let's maybe think long term. And even maybe generating a calendar for next season. It must be so hard right now because Formula E has to go into city centres. So if city centres are under lockdown still, or still a bit iffy about COVID-19, I reckon Formula E is probably the hardest series or sport right now to get restarted.
Yeah, definitely. Firstly, I just want to point out that if you are tuning into the Twitch stream, it's tonight, not tomorrow, because we're recording this a day earlier. So yes. Remember that. So tune in a few hours' time. But yes, no, this really is one of the hardest championships, especially in motorsport, to restart because the whole city centre business. Yeah, I think I remember seeing an article a few months ago saying we may not be able to race in cities for a couple of years. But yeah, no, this and that's what fueled the talk of maybe going to a different track, maybe going to a Valencia, maybe going back to Donington or something like that. However, what it's now looking like is that we're going to have a few races in Berlin and then head to potentially Seoul. I'm not 100% sure if this is going to be the best option. However, it does seem to be the way that we're going. So yeah, I think for Formula E, they can't get ready as soon as other championships can. But also for Formula E, they have a lot less pressure on them. All they have to do is complete the season. Whereas Formula One and MotoGP and all these other series, they need to start their season and then from that complete enough races that it constitutes a championship. We just need 2 more official rounds for it to be counted as an official championship and not be null and void. So it's possible. However, I'm not sure about the whole idea of going to Berlin and Seoul. Yeah, I'd say finish the season permanent tracks and then maybe consider going back to street tracks for season 7.
So, Will, we spoke to Nick de Vries today, actually, and he was all for, obviously, the restarting in Berlin. He was against going to permanent circuits because it's against the DNA of Formula E. So he felt that going to city circuits, and obviously Berlin makes sense because it's in an airfield. But bearing that in mind, let's say Formula E have also, yes, we've just got to finish the season, that's fine, but we've also got to sort out a calendar for next season. And that could be more tricky to actually sort of, put together at this precise moment with the world that we're in, because we don't know what's going to happen. Whereas if you're in an isolated area, like a Formula One track, for example, then it's easier to go, what, we can just pop around to this place and do a race. Whereas Formula E, there's so many permutations that could stop us from even releasing a Season 7 calendar when they want to.
Yeah, it's difficult. I guess the thing is that at this point, we don't know too much about what the future is going to hold with regards to COVID. I think that at the moment, and rightly so, the focus has very much been on getting a season completed, in our case, in Formula E's case. And in the case of, Formula One, MotoGP, IndyCar, it's been about getting a season started and trying to kind of get up to that kind of number of races they need to have a calendar. And as a result, there hasn't been a huge amount of focus on kind of 2021, or in our case, 2021. So I think that in terms of finishing this season, I understand the logic with going to Berlin, but maybe Formula E will have to potentially tweak its DNA in the future if challenging in city centres or on street tracks becomes more difficult. As we reported on the website recently, Assen is a circuit, this is a permanent circuit that's potentially under consideration. We've heard murmurings of potentially going to Valencia or going to Donington. So maybe this is something that Formula E will have to adapt to. Obviously, we don't know what the situation is going to be with regards to crowds being allowed. And, if having crowds becomes easier, then I think that street circuits again become a possibility. But I think that with the urgency of getting this season on, potentially the thought hasn't been put in yet to kind of consider in the future. And a lot of that will depend on the kind of pandemic situation, but also if Formula E is willing to potentially try this new route of looking at permanent circuits like Assen, like Donington, and like many others that I'm sure would be really excited and interested in holding a Formula E race.
I suppose, Jack, like the thing that worries me, and I think what worries a lot of people, is, people don't want to go to normal racing tracks, okay? And therefore Formula E gets compared to a Formula One car. Or even if we go to Valencia and it gets compared to a MotoGP bike, for example, right? People still don't want that comparison to Formula E to be, compared to a Formula One if we were to go to a track where a Formula One car has been before.
Well, yeah, that's obviously like the main thing. I remember they were comparing. I remember seeing a video once where they were comparing Season 1 Formula E to the 2014 Mercedes. That is not a comparison that you can do. You cannot have a sport in its infancy and compare it with the most dominant force in the most prestigious motorsport series. That's not something that you can do, and you can't expect for Formula E to be a quick right from the off. Yes, the potential has improved over the last few years, and they are a lot quicker than they were. I remember seeing a video of Season 1 Monaco versus Season 5 Monaco for Formula E, and they were substantially quicker. And the thing is, nowadays, I mean, yes, we aren't as quick as Formula One. That's very clear to see, and there's no way that we can change that. But I think it's fine I think it's now fine to head to these circuits and potentially do some laps. I think we are quicker than MotoGP. I'd be surprised if we're not. But yeah, there will still be the whole Formula One comparison thing. But at the end of the day, let it happen. Who cares? Yeah.
For me, I'd like us to stay on temporary street circuits because that is the DNA, and I don't want us to lose sight of that, because I remember the story about potentially racing on normal circuits for up to 3 years, and I was like, well, that's just a gateway into moving away from what Formula E believe in bringing, because once you start doing something and you start repeating it, then it's like, well, we've been doing it for 3 years, so we might as well just carry on doing it because, well, it's worked and people are still interested and people are still coming. So we can have a mixture of street circuits and normal circuits. And I honestly, I don't think, we want that in Formula E. I think we started by bringing it to the cities, and I hope Formula E stick with that. I hope they still bring it to the cities. But personally, I still think that does make it harder for them to potentially restart and obviously getting a calendar ready, especially if, we're seeing Brazil. I know Formula E isn't in Brazil at the moment, but obviously they're getting a second wave. China might be getting a second wave. And if there's any cities that are around that area, that all of a sudden becomes a huge issue for Formula E to potentially go there. So whereas if you go to an isolated place like a track, like we said earlier, you might be able to get away with it if you are in a controlled bubble, which I think Formula E will find extremely hard. But what I want to move on to, though, let's break away from this and talk about Porsche, because obviously we had a huge announcement, Will, and obviously you weren't on the show when it broke, so it'd be great to hear your thoughts about it. Is Pascal Wehrlein. Obviously, Pascal Wehrlein said that he was leaving Mahindra immediately. Now, interestingly enough, yes, Pascal Wehrlein has basically told the world, but there hasn't been any official confirmation from Mahindra nor Porsche. So what my feeling is are we, because there's been no confirmation about this from either party, are we expecting now maybe Neil Yanni to actually finish the season with Porsche? Maybe he fought for that. He said, no, let me finish the season. That's part of my contract. I don't want that to, be inflicted in any way. And, Pascal Wehrlein's just going to have to sit on the sidelines until season 7 starts.
So my initial reaction is that in terms of why this hasn't all been completed yet, I think that's just kind of a formality. I highly doubt that Wehrlein would have gone out and made that announcement on his Instagram if he wasn't pretty certain that he'd be driving a Porsche either towards the end of this season or next season. So I think that's pretty much a formality. In terms of the decision itself, I think it's a really good move for Wehrlein. This is not to besmirch Mahindra in any way, but as a German driver, Porsche is a huge German manufacturer, and one with a huge amount of history and a huge amount of potential in Formula E. So I think it's a smart move from him. And in terms of the season, I would have thought that Gianni pretty much has a contract to the end of the season. Obviously, there might be performance clauses in there, which mean that they maybe can take him out if they can get Wehrlein in that seat sooner, because obviously he has kind of ended his relationship with Mahindra immediately, as far as we're concerned, from what we've seen from his social media. So I imagine if Porsche think that they can get Wehrlein in the seat and he can do a better job than Gianni was doing, which I think that he probably could, given that Gianni's kind of yet to score, despite the fact that Lotter has kind of been in Super Pole a number of occasions now, then I think they'll try and do that. But whether that is kind of part of Gianni's contract remains to be seen. So yeah, I think that Yanni deserves probably the opportunity to finish the season. He's had 6 races and he was, not got the same kind of consistent running experience that someone like Lotter has had in Formula E. So maybe it just was a bit of an adjustment period. They've obviously acted fast, but I think also for a talent like Wehrlein, it makes sense to act fast. And I think that he's a young driver with a huge amount of potential who's admired not just in Formula E, but kind of in Formula One as well. So it makes sense, but I think Yanni deserves the end of the season to maybe try and earn himself another seat.
Jack, honestly, I think that Porsche, they're in a tricky situation. They've got Neil Yanni is a Porsche driver, for example. Okay, so just kicking him out is a bit harsh. He's part of their program, so I don't think they'd want to do that to him. So I have a feeling that they're in a tricky situation. They might say, "Look, Neil, we've decided to go to Pascal for season 7, just to let you know." But we'll give you, because you've been on our books for ages, we're not just going to shaft you and kick you out. We'll let you go and finish the season, but just to let you know, do what you can for this season and see if you can get a seat elsewhere.
Yeah, no, I think that would be fair to Neil Yanni. As I've mentioned before, he has had a torrid Formula E career. Yes, he's done fantastic things outside of this sport, but in terms of Formula E, he originally came in season 4 for Dragon and had a horrible weekend in Hong Kong and was subsequently dropped for Jose Maria Lopez. and I know for certain that that he described that as one of the worst weekends of his driving career. However, he was given a second life at Porsche, and unfortunately, it's been more of the same for him. It just hasn't clicked in the way that that it did with Andre in the Chichita back in season 4, because we saw him struggle for the first few races, and then we went to Santiago, and he just shot to the top of the table almost immediately. And so yeah, I think it is a massive shame for Neil Yanni. I think it's fair that he sees out the season, which is even more confusing on why Wehrlein has apparently jumped early. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting on whether on how it happens, whether Pascal's going to be in the seat or whether Neil sees out the season. It's something that we are yet to see.
Yeah, which is what I'm thinking. Like, obviously, this is all speculation. Like, it's interesting that obviously Pascal's announced it on social media, probably from the pressure that the media have put on in terms of, saying that he's moving to Porsche. He I don't know, went against everybody and announced something, because it's just interesting that both parties actually haven't said anything. But we have had conversations with Mahindra, which basically have confirmed that Wehrlein has left and they will be announcing a new driver lineup for next season. But I just think it's interesting, this sort of the way, and obviously with COVID-19 that it's played out, it's a really odd situation, and the fact that we haven't heard anything now for at least 5, 6, 7 days, a week, that I find that quite interesting. But a question, Will, that I asked Jack last time, and I have asked Dilbag this, and we put in a request to interview Dilbag, and it'll be a question that we sort of want to bring again. Like, Mahindra are a fully fledged manufacturer, they're huge in India. But they obviously, being in Formula E is obviously making them more of a global brand. Like, more people now have heard of Mahindra. I'm going to be honest, I didn't hear of Mahindra before Formula E. And now, so they've got more of a global presence just by being in the series. But because they're not that big name, they had such a great driver in Pascal Wehrlein. And one of the best, and Mahindra have been one of the better teams in Formula E. So to lose him to Porsche, just because, Porsche, is a well-known brand and could potentially go very far in this series, and that's potentially two drivers, Felix Rosenqvist that they lost to IndyCar, now Pascal Wehrlein, two top drivers that they've lost. And I'm just starting to think if they're starting to get annoyed that people are just jumping ship because not many people have heard of Mahindra.
I think it's potentially more than just Porsche's name as well. We should add that they have actually been pretty impressive, especially in qualifying, in their short kind of stint in Formula E. I mentioned Andre Lotter's qualifying record, and I think we'll all acknowledge that Yanni hasn't quite lived up to expectations. So maybe Pascal Wehrlein's looking at that situation and thinking, what could I be doing in that car potentially to extract more? And you look at Mahindra, we know how good D'Ambrosio is as well, and they're not, they're 10th in the standings. They're not exactly kind of reeling in the points this season. So I can see from Wehrlein's perspective, if you even kind of take out the Porsche German aspect and just the kind of size and reputation of that team.
Pascal Wehrlein, they've jumped ship from Mahindra. They had Felix Rosenqvist as well, so two huge drivers effectively who have jumped ship and gone to different. Well, Rosenqvist went to IndyCar, but Wehrlein went to Porsche, and that's a big name. When Mahindra isn't that big name globally, yes, they're becoming much more of a global brand because they're in Formula E, but just because they're not as well known, they've lost out potentially on two huge drivers.
Yeah, so I think that firstly, it would be wrong of us not to kind of acknowledge the huge amounts of success that Mahindra have had in the series, and it's very much kind of like a Euro-centric series in terms of kind of where the teams are based, the drivers, much of the calendar, although that is kind of not so much of a factor. And they've done really well. But for a brand that is not as big in Europe as the likes of Mercedes, Audi, BMW, Porsche, these are huge manufacturers with quite a storied history in motorsport. So just competing with them is always going to be difficult in terms of resource and in terms of reputation. So, I think they've done an exceptional job, and unfortunately for them, Formula E is becoming a very popular location for some of the biggest manufacturers in the world, and that is just going to put them at something of a competitive disadvantage when it comes to attracting drivers. And they're not having their best season, and Porsche looks like a good opportunity for Wehrlein. So I can see why it's a difficulty, but Mahindra have still got Jerome D'Ambrosio, who's an incredibly good driver, and as we know, Formula E is becoming something of a destination for drivers who don't maybe quite make it to Formula One, or don't fancy moving over to America to compete in IndyCar. So there should be no shortage of names kind of being put forward for that seat, and I'm sure that if they go about it the right way, they can find themselves a very talented driver to fill that seat.
Jack, I think the problem that Mahindra face right now is that they're a massive brand, but they only really sell their cars in India. Okay, and I remember mentioning this to Dilbag Gil. I think it's not going to happen overnight. If they start selling cars in America and Europe, let's say tomorrow, right? There's not going to have that brand name. They're going to have to do well in Formula E. They're going to have to start winning. And I think that could be another reason why Pascal Wehrlein left. Look at Tech Cheetah, when they were technically part of Renault, still attracted Jean-Eric Vergne because they were, obviously he came season 3, but, they started winning, so they've kept hold of him. Okay, and they've attracted now a really good driver in Antonio Felix da Costa because they're winning. And I suppose, Mahindra have dropped back a little bit from that winning days when they were with Felix Rosenqvist, which might have swayed Pascal Wehrlein into moving to Porsche because they're not winning anymore, because it's just how competitive the championship is. But also, as a side note, if they were to start selling more cars in Europe, yes, they'll start getting more well known, but I think they have to do better in Formula E. So if they were to switch focus and they were to come and be more of a global brand, then maybe their reputation of a racing team will improve.
Yeah, quite possibly. One thing that Mahindra did initially to make sure that they put all their assets into the Formula E project was that they used to be a manufacturer in Moto3, and they were one of the engines there. However, they left Moto3 to focus on Formula E, and that was about season 2, season 3. So that was when they hired Felix Rosenqvist, and Rosenqvist, I think, really had a proper shot at winning the championship in season 4, and there were just a few niggling problems that meant that he couldn't. I remember, I think he was leading the championship going to Mexico. He was on pole, and then he had a mechanical problem there. We went to Rome. He had I think he made contact with. I was there. I should remember it, but he made contact with one of the walls, and so yeah, he lost 2 wins there, and suddenly he was out of the fight, and he could have really given Jean-Eric Vergne a run for his money. In the end, I think he finished 3rd, 4th, or 5th in the chat, somewhere around there. But that factor meant that he did lose out on what could have been a championship run. And then he got an offer that he just really couldn't turn down in one of the top teams, Chip Ganassi Racing in IndyCar. So he made the switch over to there, and he's doing very well over there. I think Felix Rosenqvist was the best chance for Mahindra to do well. Pascal Wehrlein, I don't rate him as highly as Felix Rosenqvist, in my opinion, but Pascal Wehrlein is still an incredible driver, and as for Jerome D'Ambrosio, he picks up the points when other people can't, as we saw in season 5. I mean, the amount of times he was at the top of the championship, I bet he didn't want to be at the top of the championship, because that meant he always went into Group 1 in qualifying, but he was always there or thereabout until the final few races where he started to slip away. But I think Pascal Wehrlein is going to be a massive loss to Mahindra.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the sticky thing now for Mahindra is their name just going to affect them in the future? With all these manufacturers that are now in the series, they have to win if they're going to become a success, and that's no easy feat, right? So it's going to be really difficult, I think, to see how Mahindra develop. And I've always had that concern about Mahindra becoming a midfield team because they aren't just as well known. So drivers, like what's happening right now, might just switch teams and go to a well-known name because they think that team will, it's Porsche, so they must, eventually get to the top, whereas Mahindra, you're just hoping that they can get to the top, and you don't have any sort of long history to sort of like say, Mahindra can do this. They're a new team. Well, they are a manufacturer, but they're sort of a new manufacturer in racing, especially in single seaters. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes for them. But what we want to move on to now is actually we just had the Le Mans 24-hour virtual race, and we wanted to discuss this because obviously a lot of time and effort has gone into this, and I suppose, Will, this goes back to what Jamie Regal said about the Race at Home Challenge, which came around very quickly. So, and obviously the Le Mans race, they had plenty of time, and you saw it with the overlays and the sort of normal straight 24-hour race, which we saw the driver swaps. Yes, they might have had problems with server issues, but I suppose it has to be expected. But what my main question is, on terms of what we saw from the Le Mans 24-hour race, which was a really good spectacle, was if Formula E just ran a 45-minute race on rFactor 2 with energy management, it may have been more enjoyable to see a normal standard race like we did with the Le Mans 24 hours.
I think that, I'll echo your sentiment there by saying that I thought it was fantastic. I watched about 16 hours of the 24 in total, and enjoyed every minute of it. So I think that what they did that was really good was that, one, every single driver who was competing pretty much wanted to be there. It didn't look like there was anyone there for contractual obligations. The way that they kind of merged the world of sim driving and real life driving was really effective and really good, and it made for quite an even contest that went down to pretty much the last kind of half an hour between the top three squads. So that was something about it that was excellent. Another thing, as you mentioned, was that it was very realistic. I think other than the tyre allocation, so I think they had pretty much unlimited access to tyres, it was very realistic. Obviously, there's a couple of issues with the server crashed a couple of times. Obviously, Team Wehrlein with Max and Lando Norris, Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, obviously had some gremlins, and that was disappointing because they looked like a really competitive team. But otherwise, it was a really well done and kind of polished product. And I think that there are definitely things that Formula E could learn from this if they were to run a kind of race at home challenge in the future. I think one of those, as Jack mentioned, was the energy management. I think that just making it close to the real thing as possible is a really good way of doing it. I think energy management, 45-minute races, and also potentially it would be about making sure that the drivers who compete want to be there and are of a certain level, so that it can be kind of a fair and even and entertaining contest. Obviously that is difficult because we want to have the big names there, and it was interesting to show that how much some of the Formula E drivers have thrown themselves into sim racing, because you've got the likes of Stoffel Van Dorn and Oliver Rowland and John Verne, who all did really well in the kind of general classification in the Le Mans virtual. So there's clearly Formula E drivers who are keen on it, and we saw Buemi, we saw Yanni. So there's definitely enthusiasm for it. It's just that I think having all 24 drivers and kind of forcing them, as we saw with Daniel Apps, obviously, potentially leads to a worse spectacle. So there are definitely things that it can take from it. And I think that if they are to do it in the future, I think that going for that increased realism with the longer race and the energy management is definitely a way they should go.
Obviously, Jack, in terms of the race itself, obviously the Le Mans 24-hour really lends itself to sharing drivers. So obviously, like, they had two Team Redline, let's just have two drivers, for example, real life drivers, say like Lando and Max, for example, and then they had two sim racers. It was very similar up and down the grid. I think there was one team that actually had all four as real drivers, but it was a great way to link sim racing and real life drivers together, I thought. Do you think maybe that Formula E should have done a race, virtual GP style, allowed the drivers that wanted to be in the race, which probably were most of the ones that did the virtual GP anyway, and then you had that mix of sim racers that made up the rest of the grid to make it extremely tight, as the Le Mans 24-hour race was?
Yes, I completely agree. I think that's what they should have done. However, then they would have branded the Race Home Challenge a copy of the virtual Grand Prix, which is disappointing. But one thing that I think the virtual Le Mans that we saw this weekend, one thing that gave it its whole prestige is the prestige of the Le Mans 24 Hours. It is this historic race. If you say a 45-minute race around Berlin, it isn't as. That's okay, but it's not the Le Mans 24 Hours on a virtual simulator. So I think the whole that they had it running for all but a couple parts of the 24 hours because they had server problems for some of it. But yeah, no, I think the prestige of that kind of helped it. Whereas with the Race Home Challenge, it's just like it's just a formula. It would just be like a normal Formula E race. There'd be nothing really that special, and that's why they tried the format that they did, the Race Royale format. Admittedly, they should have done something possibly different to that. I know that the W Series have done three races, 3 races per event, and I feel that that's probably a better route to go down. But I mean, the Race Home Challenge is now in the past. They can't really change anything about that, and yeah, what's been done has been done, really.
Maybe a reverse grid would have been the way to go. I was just thinking about it. I totally get your point. I totally get it in terms of, it just would have been standard. There's no prestige to it. It's like, another Formula E race, which I suppose that's quite bad. We'd probably love it, but for a casual person maybe trying to find out about racing during this time, maybe they would have gone, this isn't for me. Whereas maybe if they did do something like the W Series, as you mentioned there, like even to do 2 races, so you see Stoffel Van Dorn having to come from the back of the grid or from 10th or something like that to win. So the top 10 is you reverse the grid somehow, and maybe that would have been more entertaining. But you're absolutely right. In the past now. So let's move on to some YouTube questions, because we have a YouTube question, and it comes from our lovely friend of the show, Remco Madril, who put this question in because he's bouncing off what we discussed, Jack, in the last show with battery technology and longer races, faster cars. The toss-up between that and battery life. And he mentioned to us that, hydrogen cars, they're still being developed. Obviously, we had the Delta Wing thing, which I think was hydrogen, that was in the Garage 56 thing that was in Le Mans. And he's saying, that takes 5 minutes to charge. So maybe, Formula E should maybe focus a bit more on faster cars now, because maybe the range of the battery might not be good enough to do long journeys, whereas if you have a hydrogen car, you just fill up for 5 minutes, a bit longer than petrol, but at least you can travel as far as you like without charging. So what do you think? Do you think Formula E should focus on, having longer races and extending the battery range, or should they go more to that sort of faster car thing based on what we now know with the hydrogen car stuff, which, to be honest with you, I wasn't a big... I didn't have too much knowledge about, but Remco kindly informed us a bit more about it.
Yeah, well, it is a good question, Remco, and I'm very annoyed that you've asked that because I don't have really much to say on it. But no, I think I think as we discussed on the show last week, I think we are going towards a kind of midway in between. So the cars will get faster and they'll be able to cover more, but it's not going to be so long that it's going to be like the same length as, say, a Formula One race. It's going to be I don't think they're going to go anywhere near 1.5 hours. They're going to make it faster and then stick maybe an hour maximum limit on it, because I just don't see them going much longer than that in terms of actually wanting to have a race longer than an hour. They just want to like use they want to develop the technology so it's even better, and then so they have faster cars, and for them to run. And I think it would be better to see faster cars, so then we can prove the ones who want to do the comparison between the F1 car and the FE car. So then they can have the laps side by side and stick it up on YouTube and be like, oh, okay, it's not as big as it was.
Yeah, which is, I was just thinking, like, I'm not the biggest agreement. I think it's interesting what Will says, actually, Will, because, I said, Gen 3, when we were talking about this, what step are they going to do? Obviously, Gen 1, we had the car swaps. Gen 2, we can do a full race. What battery improvement can happen? Because that's what, a gag said is the huge thing. So what do you think? Do you think that like they should sort of improve the battery life, sort of maybe go for a longer race to prove that the battery has increased, or do we just stick to faster cars? Because I suppose if we go faster and the battery can technically keep up with it, we'll still have those energy management races, but we'll be running at 350 or 400 kilowatts during a race rather than 200 that we are at the moment.
It's interesting. I guess, the future of motor racing and Formula E is, a fascinating topic. And I don't know if you guys listened to the interview, but I know Jean-Eric Verne has predicted that Formula One and Formula E may one day merge. So I think if that was ever to happen, obviously they would want to go towards much longer races and much faster cars. So it really depends on kind of what the ambition is. I like longer races generally, but I do probably agree with Pico in the sense that Formula E probably should stick to kind of being under an hour, because I think that part of its appeal is the kind of like quick fire, snappy race weekend. Get qualifying and the race done in one day. Gives you the opportunity to do double headers as well, which I think is potentially better if they want more racing. Then I think they should focus probably more on the double headers over a weekend than potentially the longer races. So it depends. I think that obviously seeing faster cars would also be really cool, but also, I don't think that for me watching Formula E, the speed of the vehicles has never been something that I really kind of think makes it look like any less of a challenge. My interview that we did with Jamie Chadwick for the magazine last month, she was saying just like how difficult the adaptation is to drive the car. So, add in then just going faster. I don't think it necessarily makes it. I don't think it necessarily needs to be made more difficult. There are so many different things to kind of be considered when you're trying to drive a Formula E car, with the kind of energy management and the tightness of the circuits they race on. So I don't know. I think that it really depends on the ambitions of Formula E, the way that they want to go in terms of format. But I don't think there's any like one change that needs to be made. I think it's just what they feel that they can best do and best pull off.
Excellent. So I think, boys, that is a show. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
No worries. And just remember, just a few housekeepers. Remember, in a couple of hours' time, Twitch link below. Come find out how Tesla doing their first race and who we signed. There's going to be real drivers in there. They're going to be much younger, because I think the game starts in 2016, so it's technically season 4. So we're going back in time. But do come along and join us on Twitch. If you want to join the Discord channel as well, hit that link below. There's also a Patreon link, which if you love us that much, if you think, just give these guys some money, like boom, 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 boom. You can find that link down there as well. Please remember to like and subscribe. You've been watching the FEZ show. Thank you so much. We will see you very soon. Goodbye.